All right. Hope folks can see my screen. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Very, very excited to be here today this morning to share a little bit about the Microsoft data transformation journey. So as Mike introduced me, my name is Karthik, and I currently lead the data governance solutions at Microsoft. In my most recent role, I had the great opportunity to build and grow the data office for Microsoft's internal data and digital transformation. And the story I'll share with you today is learnings from that journey. It's a 5-year journey, which I'm going to try and condense down to like approximately 20 minutes. So we'll see how far we can get. And I'll also offer up that those of you who want to learn more and want to connect and share learnings, please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to continue the dialogue and conversation. So I've been at Microsoft now for roughly about 24 years. The last 10 years have all been focused on leading data transformation investments, both within product groups, as well as building out our internal data office. And if I had to kind of summarize my data empowerment journey in like numbers, it'll come down to these numbers, which I'll unpack for you shortly. I think this is a story that most CDOs on the call would be able to relate to. So when I got started in my role building out the data office, I had at least sort of like 2 other folks in the broader organization who felt that they should be doing my job and that their role is actually the role of the CDO. And we collectively had at least 5 other people who thought that there was no need for the role or for the office and that they could pretty much do data for the company. Right. And the initial starting point for us was what we call the 40-40-20 starting point, which is there was 40% of the business and the operations teams who were really starting to see the opportunity and the value of needing to transform how we sort of thought about and operated data. And there was another 40% who sort of were kind of like aware of the opportunities, but were super skeptical on the fence, waiting to see, hey, where could this thing go before they were willing to jump ship and be a part of the overall journey. And roughly about 20% of the organization was like, hey, we really don't need a data transformation journey. We're quite good doing what we're doing, operating in our data silos, just leave us alone, right? And I think that's a pretty classic starting point for like most CDOs, with these numbers potentially slightly varying, but that was kind of like my starting point. And where we ended up over the last 5 years is kind of the numbers on the right, the 1 and the 90-10. The 1 being like one common operating model and way to think about how we leverage data as a true organizational asset, to Mike's earlier point, as well as in a true sort of 90-10 state where 90% of the broader Microsoft enterprise is kind of like aligned to that operating model and maximizing their value realization from data. And a good 10% are still sort of operating in the siloed state, who over a period of time might continue to sort of like do so for good reasons, for good business reasons, or could end up merging into the 90. And that's the whole sort of like, in many ways, the gist of what data transformation journeys are all about. They're all about sort of recognizing that is a significant component of starting with a baseline understanding of where is the organization's health overall in terms of like the points of view around data and opportunities to leverage data. And there are going to be different starting points depending on the organization. And there's also going to be some good healthy tension and sort of like resistance and sometimes even like healthy skepticism towards sort of like any kind of like initiative or investments to transform or modernize data journeys. And it takes a good amount of, I would say, initial effort from data officers to sort of spend the quality time to understand the root causes for such resistance and potential skepticism, because understanding and unpacking those factors will really help you chart course and figure out the right path forward. And in my role building out the data office, like I spent a good amount of time like unpacking the reason for what was initially very strong resistance in certain quarters, and in many quarters, like I would say, like strong skepticism, as well as sort of some cautiously optimistic optimism in certain sort of like partners and functions, which was actually good to have in the starting point as well. But taking the time to deeply understand the organizational factors really helped me sort of take a step back and think about, great, how do we sort of bring the organization along, which then sort of like plays into the next 2 steps, which is reframing a data strategy with a purpose that's truly anchored on maximizing the value outcomes for the broader enterprise from our data assets, and also recruiting and rallying the entire organization as a whole to play that opportunity as a team sport, as opposed to sort of a centralized data office or a centralized function trying to do it all for the enterprise, right? So in many ways, these are the 3 legs that I'll talk about as I unpack sort of the journey further for you. First, starting out with the organizational resistance and the skepticism. So on the left, you kind of see the state in terms of where we started. When I first came aboard and took the opportunity to build out the data office, we did have like what we would broadly describe as a highly centralized data office with a data strategy that was very much focused on the defense-centric aspects of data management in terms of ensuring that we have great compliant and secure data operations, which, don't get me wrong, is extremely important to do, because you cannot have a data strategy that compromises sort of the importance of needing to operate a secure and a compliant data estate. But at the same time, it's also super important to ensure that it is not an access or control sort of conversation, but it truly is an and, where the and is like, yes, you got to have the responsible controls, but you also have to figure out the way to responsibly democratize access so that the broader organization can benefit from data as an asset and apply it for truly transformative outcomes. And a lot of the words that you see in the word cloud sort of on the left were terms that were used by several of my stakeholders to describe how they felt about the journey up to that point in time in terms of how the IT organization had sort of operated and run the data office. And I really had to take a deep sort of like step back and think about this feedback because the feedback was so strong. But at the same time, it was also looking at it from their shoes and perspective, very, very valid feedback. I mean, which is like, hey, look, I mean, this is an asset that the broader organization needs to be able to apply. But the kind of controls that we have around the asset, the lockdowns, the need to get everything done through like one centralized team, and it's not a very great strategy for the velocity and rate at which each of us as business leaders and operational leaders need to be able to innovate for our broader enterprise. So we really struggle kind of like saying like what the value of doing all of this is. We totally get the defense aspects and the control aspects, but is the best way to do this really to emphasize so much on controls and completely sort of like not cater to the requirements that we have in terms of access and innovative applications, right? And that's a great question to ask. And as a data officer, the number one thing is we cannot be defensive in reacting to that response. It is super important for us to, while every cell sort of like in our being is going to try to figure out a way to sort of like defend that posture and make reason with it. I think it's really important for us to take a step back and understand that a true data strategy has to balance both sides of the slide, which is you got to have some really good sort of like controls in place to enable responsible use of data. But you also got to figure out a way to address the top of mind of your business and operations and the broader enterprise partners across the organization, each of whom understand the business domains and the opportunities the best, and who need to be empowered and enabled to be able to apply data in responsible ways to grow their purposes and the broader enterprise. So striking this balance between sort of like control and enabling responsible access to drive transformative innovation as an organizational team sport is something that's very fundamental to sort of like a modern data strategy. So where we ended up is sort of like taking a step back and bringing together all of the different stakeholders to reframe how we wanted to approach the data strategy. And the key word here is reframing the data strategy for a shared purpose, with a shared purpose being the key words. So this isn't about sort of like a team needing to control data and own all of the data. It isn't about sort of like data being the asset of one or a handful of teams. It truly is about recognizing that data is an organizational asset and how can we collectively come together as a broader enterprise to manage our data, to operate our data, and most importantly, to do that in a manner that will help us to responsibly transform sort of our business and our opportunities. And there was absolutely no debate on the bottom portion of the slide, which is like data is fundamentally the oxygen for transformation. I mean, it doesn't matter what transformation sort of initiative you're embarking on, whether it's broad strokes digital transformation, whether it is hardening your cybersecurity systems, whether it's figuring out what's the best way to sort of like integrate and apply generative AI into your business sort of like operations, or any other opportunity that you might choose to word it as you wish for your transformation and growth. Regardless of these opportunities, data is a core and fundamental asset. Extracting insights and intelligence from data and deeply integrating it into your experiences and your services is going to be front and center to be able to transform and grow as a digital organization. And a modern data strategy should really focus on the notion of responsibly democratizing data so that you can drive that transformation through sort of federated execution of the opportunities by teams across your organization, as opposed to it all being anchored and centered in one central type of like organization. And this was core to the strategy that we wanted to define and also use it to anchor a shared purpose across the broader enterprise of Microsoft. So if you look at it from a broad sort of like 1,000-foot view of how we organize and set this up from a broad organizational architecture perspective, we started at the bottom, which is like, hey, we truly do have to responsibly democratize data. To do that, we need to put in place a set of great responsible foundations. But the key here being not architecting and implementing the foundations as locked-in sort of like platforms or solutions that can only be used by a central team, but truly building the foundations as self-serve platforms, as capabilities that we need to build and run once for the company, but also capabilities that can be used by teams who we can onboard from across the company and enable and empower to drive their individual data ownership and data transformation investments. So broadly speaking, our foundation is comprised of a connected data foundation, which is a foundation that helped integrate and bring together all of our various operational data sources and systems into a unified view of our enterprise data estate. It included an adaptable data governance foundation, which is a key component that really helps us make sure that we don't just build a data governance foundation as something that's used only by a data office, but a data governance foundation as a true sort of democratized platform where the actual ownership of the data, the ownership of the data products and the policies governing the use and the discovery of the data and the data products could all be democratized in a responsible manner to the actual teams who are producing and owning the data. And sometimes the team producing the data may not be the team that actually owns the data. Like, for instance, we have several HR systems that are built and operated by our HR IT team, but then the data that emits and is managed by those systems is owned by our HR business function. So recognizing the importance of data stewardship and data ownership needing to exist in the domain teams where the data is sort of like most deeply understood, as well as where the transformative opportunities are best defined and driven for the organization, is as key to figure out in terms of like setting up a great data governance solution that can truly sort of immersively engage the entire organization to sort of like participate in the team sport of data management. And having a fantastic data governance and an adaptable foundation that can sort of like enable those kinds of experiences for teams across the company to own and operate their data assets is a very, very fundamental component of the foundation. And what we also grew to learn and appreciate a lot as we traversed our journey is the importance of investing in data literacy programs and not assuming that sort of everyone truly understands all the different facets and dimensions of data. So a data transformation journey is not just technology. Technology is the enabler. A data transformation journey is fundamentally, it's a people and a change management sort of like journey to navigate, and as well as a cultural journey. And ensuring that you've got the right data literacy programs in place to help drive that sort of evolution and change management is a very, very core investment that I would highly recommend folks to think about. And overarching all of this is this notion of great, like how do we sort of like manage data at scale, especially with the data explosion and with almost every organization on the planet starting to explode into petabyte and exabyte scale data estates. Trying to do all of this through just pure manual or just rules-based automated approaches is not going to scale. So bringing in AI as sort of like a really valuable sort of like asset in the mix, but also ensuring that the AI is truly augmented intelligence, not just artificial intelligence, but true augmented intelligence where the subject matter expertise of your human data owners, experts, and stewards can be combined with the power of AI to truly create this human reinforced loop where the human beings and the personas in your organization can truly play a very active role in terms of like tuning and programming and optimizing the AI models on an ongoing basis. And the AI models in turn can sort of help the humans sort of like elevate and scale in terms of their higher value added operations that they could be focused on, as opposed to trying to sort of handle everything manually for the growing and exploding data estates. So there's an amazing opportunity to apply AI in the spaces of data classification, data quality management, master data management, you name it. Almost every data management and operational aspect could truly benefit in scaling from innovative applications of AI. So with a great foundation like this, on the top now, what you're able to do is to sort of like open up in a responsible manner the federated data ownership and applications of the data to build the true transformative data products for the enterprise and enabling every function across the organization to be able to do that, as opposed to it all being centralized in like one common team. Right. So this in a nutshell is kind of like how we sort of like ended up pivoting our overall sort of like architectural. And when I say architectural, not technology architecture, but organizational architectural approach to data transformation. So to make it real for you, let me give you a real story. So when we first started our journey, like I would say, and let me take one domain, and this applies to like multiple domains, almost every domain in Microsoft, but I'll pick the customer experience domain. And at the starting point, we were just about operating the customer experience. The key word here is operating the customer experience, right? And if you look at this, the way this worked is our customer data estate was pretty fabricated, was pretty sort of like proliferated across the organization. There would be several data silos. We had about two to three dozen plus just customer account and master data management systems, augmented with several sort of transactional and operational and customer engagement systems. And the data in those systems would all sort of exist in their silos and be completely locked down, only accessible to sort of the engineering or the IT teams that were producing the data. And then there was a centralized IT data team that would sort of like put in place all the policies and controls and govern almost every access to any data that existed in that ecosystem. Our business functions would all have to rely on the central IT data team to get any access to data. And even if they did get access to data, it'll usually be in the form of dashboards and reports, not really sort of like the grain of data that is needed for the business functions to sort of self-serve and own their deep analytics and machine learning and AI investments. And then on the top, each of the business functions would then rely on centralized IT application teams to truly take all of these data assets and build applications, which they eventually then deliver to create the customer experiences. So while this setup was very secure, it was very compliant, It was also not the best setup because of the lack of democratization, responsible democratization, and the gridlocks that sort of the functions that truly knew how to transform the business had to navigate to be able to get and use data in meaningful ways. And also from a customer experience perspective, the data silos did not sort of like create a great connected experience for our customers. And usually the customers, the experiences with individual sort of functions and touch points with Microsoft, while it would be great within the context of those touch points, weren't necessarily connected left to right and end to end. And also the lack of that kind of connected data estate results in needing to sort of deliver very generic or highly segmented customer experiences, as opposed to like very personalized sort of like granular experiences that are truly sort of contextualized to each individual customer. So where we got from this state is where we are today, where it isn't just about operating the customer experience, but it's truly about transforming the customer experience. And we accomplished this by applying the architecture we spoke to earlier, which is we brought all of the customer data estate into that common responsible set of data foundations, both the connected data estate as well as the adaptable governance foundation. We were able to thereby enable each of the customer data domain teams to own and operate their data estates on this foundation, including sort of like governing the access and use policies. In the connected data foundation, we were able to unify all of the customer data points into a unified customer graph that could provide a single version of truth for the connected customer data estate down to the level of individual accounts and users within those accounts. And all of that rich information was opened up in a responsibly democratized manner to each of our business functions and units, who, by the way, had also started to invest in growing that data and technical capacities, where today almost every one of our business functions have sort of like the technical and the data capabilities needed to operate their domain self-contained within the business units, operating in a truly sort of responsibly federated model where they could onboard to the foundations and leverage the foundations to operate their data estates and innovations. And this goodness, in turn, resulted in a much greater agility, responsible agility, if I may, in each of the business units being able to sort of still operate on a common set of foundations and share a lot of great data and insights across the different areas, but also own and self-serve their own sort of like data operations and applications, eventually resulting in what really matters the most, which is a total elevation and transformation of the customer experience, where all of the security and the compliance and the goodness associated with the responsible data estate were preserved as is. And on top of that, we were able to bring in the truly sort of personalized sort of experiences for our customers that were transformative in terms of like how we were able to deliver experiences across all the different touch points, leading to way better customer engagement and growth relative to where our starting point was. So a lot of people ask us, like, how did you get started? Like, you clearly cannot boil the ocean when trying to navigate a data transformation journey. And the approach, the way we like to talk to it, is a cup of data at a time approach. And we were very clear upfront that to make this work, we truly had to pivot away from focusing on just infrastructure and technology and focus instead on our prioritized data value scenarios. So building out a great backlog of transformation scenarios, picking up one scenario at a time or a set of related scenarios at a time, understanding the existing data estate that existed to enable those scenarios, as well as data gaps that we had to close. Picking up the data estate for that scenario or category of scenarios and going through first what we call the cup phase, which is like the first step in modernizing your data estate, which entails conforming your data estate to a common set of data management practices, being able to connect and unify your data sets in ways that you've not done in the past, and then most importantly, productize those connected sort of like data products so that those data products could now be consumed in a responsible manner by teams across the enterprise. And productization is very, very key because it's one thing to run data investments as projects. It's another thing to really sort of take a step back and think about building data assets as products. The moment you make that mindset shift to products, a lot of different sort of dimensions kick into gear, like, for instance, your operational health, your excellence, your observability, the ability to expose the data through modalities other than just dashboards and reports so that the data can actually be integrated into your rich-facing experiences, cataloging your data products so that sort of users can discover and consume them in a responsible way versus everything needing to be bottlenecked through a single central team. There's a lot of things that kick into gear the moment you make that shift from project to productization. And that's a key sort of like principle to think about and apply. And then you sort of navigate the loop into the data portion, which is about democratizing these amazing data products and then empowering teams to apply these data products to drive those transformative outcomes, to learn from those journeys, because you're not going to get everything right on the first few spins of the wheel. You may not ever get everything right, and that's totally fine, because this fast spinning of the wheel gives you the opportunity to learn quickly by putting water through the pipe, as well as identifying synergies as you make the progress for even further sort of integrations and opportunities for reuse. And being able to sort of iteratively navigate this loop where every data investment is anchored to the valued outcomes is the approach that we would recommend, so that you're constantly sort of like not just modernizing your data estate and your infrastructure, but you're also delivering business value every step along the way as you're navigating that data estate modernization. So this is kind of the approach that we took to get from what was the 40-40 sort of 20 state that I spoke about earlier to the 90-10 state that we are in right now, with one approach, one strategy, and one playbook that the entire organization is anchoring onto and starting to apply in terms of growing our data footprint and our data opportunities. So if I had to summarize it, data empowerment on a page, it really comes down to the circle in the middle, which is focusing your strategy on achieving a responsibly federated transformation culture, recognizing that data is fundamental to being able to do this, and recognizing that there are two dimensions to really using data well. There's the responsible sort of like management and operations of data, for which you want to try and really get in place great foundations that can truly be democratized as a platform for teams across your organization to be able to leverage and apply. And then there is the critical component of responsible democratization, which is moving the ownership of data, data assets, data products, as well as the value outcomes and the transformation opportunities for data to the teams who truly do have the domain expertise to do it the best for your organization. And bringing that all together is kind of what we would strongly recommend as a great strategy for data empowerment. So with that, I'll hand it back to Mike. And thank you all very, very much for listening in. And please do feel free to connect on LinkedIn, as well as reach out for any further clarifications that I can help provide. Thank you.